and I feel like I'm a little bit of a modern day voice competitor for Charles's work, which was, you know, passed down to Charles de Comfy from hundreds of years of academies in Europe. And I feel like I'm a vehicle to get the information out there because I'm palatable and people can hear what I'm saying. And I felt like the same thing about Dr. Deb. I was like, she is amazing. Like, I love this. And I'm a little scared to go up and talk to her because, you know, she's a little rough on the dressage, you know, because everyone's doing it wrong, you know, or whatever. And like that ability to have that voice. And, you know, I think you really bring that as well with all your different teachers. And I feel like I have a bit of that mix too, of being able to like hear the lessons coming from the amazing teachers that we've both had and still have, and then able to kind of mix it into a way that's really palatable for the rider to hear and understand and incorporate. I mean, I think that's such an important role of teachers today, to be able to bring those works, you know, either back alive from people who have already passed. You know, some of our great masters are not with us anymore, and it's our responsibility to sort of keep it alive. And your mix, like, tell me a little bit about, you know, how you got into this. And I mean, going from like Western and then starting young horses and dressage, and I mean, the anatomy, like, I just, I'm like so thirsty to know more about the functional anatomy. And I would just love to hear about how you just kind of were able to mix all of that together.
Well, what's super cool, JJ, is I realize that you and I have so many parallels. Like, I'm from Iowa, you're from Wisconsin, Midwest.
You went to UW-Madison. I was
yes.
like, she was in Madison.
I know. And then it was like, oh, we both went to Europe and spent years in Europe. And, you know, it's just really interesting. And then, you know, I was a competitor and showed, you know, all through my time in Europe, it was in a different discipline. And it was there that I was introduced to classical dressage, and which was very different from the training techniques that I had been incorporating into my ripe old age of 23 and 24 years old. You know,
yes.
You know,
when,
you think you know
we're
so
experts.
much.
Yes, we are the experts.
Duh, you know, so naive. And so then, and I'm like, well, I need to do something a little differently, because I didn't feel like I had the same type of relationship with my horses as I had when I was younger. It was so driven by the industry, really. You know, in my world, there were always trends floating around, and so you were always adapting the training program to meet whatever trainer won last year. Right. So you had to adapt your training technique to try to emulate whoever was winning. And now in retrospect, I think, well, you know, certain horses can move certain ways, and we were trying to fit them all into a mold. And that always led to, you know, a training program that was based in dominance and substitution. And if you didn't do it, you didn't get the clients, and you couldn't come, you know, if you weren't winning, and you weren't getting the clients. And so I had this overwhelming sense that I just wanted to do it differently, but I didn't know what that was or what that looked like. And so that was my motivation to move back from Germany and to Wisconsin. And I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but still at this time I had no frigging clue about what I was going to study. I knew I wanted to do something with horses, but I didn't know really what it was going to look like. And long story short, I was in that time that I was establishing residency in Wisconsin so I could afford grad school. I took some horses in training, and I had a riding accident.
Oh, wow.
I broke my back. And that was really the catalyst for me, because it was, you know, having that accident for me, it felt like all my deepest fears about not being good enough or good at what it is that I do, that was like the experience that said, you're not really in the direction that you want to be in. And so I realized that I didn't really know anything about horses. I mean, I did,
right,
but I didn't. And so that was the motivator for me to start learning about functional anatomy and what it was that I was asking my horses to do from a training perspective. And then I had a lot of aha moments. Like, so much of what I was asking was unfair because I was working against the system and not with the system. Yeah. And you know how the universe works. Then just the right people started to fall into place. Yeah. And, you know, I'm still very much on that journey, you know, and like listening to your welcome video. Oh my God, I love this woman. Because you said two things that just really spoke to my heart. First, you said you felt a responsibility. Because both you and I have been blessed with amazing teachers. Yeah. And it's that tacit knowledge that's been passed down for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we've been so lucky to have had people invest in us and to share that knowledge with us. And with knowledge comes responsibility. Yeah. And so you said, I took some notes when I was listening. Responsibility for being a modern day voice for the classical dressage tradition that you learned from Charles. And I thought, oh, I love that, because there is that sense of responsibility. But then you backed it up with the second thing, which was your passion. Yeah. And it was your passion for training horses and people to their highest potential. And I just thought, what a beautiful concert of things coming together for the horse world. One, acknowledging and preserving the tacit knowledges from all of the masters that came before us, and the passion for you to apply it to horses and students so that it continues. Because it's so much more than what you can read in a book, you know? Yes. Like, we have the opportunity to go actually be apprentices, be working students. And there's a real shift in the horse industry where, you know, people learn so much about horsemanship from their laptops. Yeah. And not that that's not a good thing. There's so much wonderful information, but you also have to have the application. And so it just really spoke to my heart that you were blending both of those things and bringing it to the horse world. So I really commend you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, coming from you, it was like giving me the chills while you're talking, because I mean, I feel like I've like met like a sister, you know, like because Charles always talks about like, it's a night, you know, it's not a knighthood, but it's like a brotherhood or a sisterhood of like, we are the voices. And I always tell my students, you know, if you love your horse, which of course, I mean, that's why we do all of this, spend all our time and money and obsess about it, and because we love horses so much. And I'm like, well, if you love your horse, learn to ride it well and learn to understand how all things work together and why there is a right way and then there is a wrong way. And, you know, the horse will tell you. And that's, you know, people always ask me, you know, Charles is also, you know, he's an aristocrat. So like, people sometimes don't know how to take him, and he comes with his gloves and his little, you know, hat, and is the most amazing man. I mean, he doesn't drink and swear. I mean, like, talk about living a life of enlightenment, you know. I mean, that's like, I wish to be like you, you know, but not everyone wants to take that message from someone, you know, like him or Dr. Deb, or, you know, or like people who are kind of shy, you know. And it's, you know, I just feel like, you know, reading through your website too, that I have found a kinship with you that we can get the message out there. And I always used to say about Charles, like, it just works. It works on your 7-year-old feral Arabian. It works on your very expensive, nice, imported warm blood. You know, it works on your, you know, Basker Curly Andalusian mix. You know, I mean, it just, like, and I'm always like, you know, people are like, you know, how do you, you know, still ride with Charles after 30 years? And I'm like, because every horse is like a new, it's all the same, you know, it all kind of comes under the umbrella of, you know, anatomy and like everything we're going to learn from you, because we're going to somehow get you into our academy as like a guest instructor or something, and host some events as soon as we can host things. But that whole idea of, you know, that knowledge of how it all comes together, and horses are horses no matter what. And really what I thought was cool too is that, like, you started in a different discipline and yet you still like learned, you know, about classical dressage, you know, and that, like, you know, even sometimes I watch other people teaching, because I'm always, you know, looking for interesting information and I want to learn more and understand more. And, you know, it all, so much of it comes down to even like circus training, like that also comes down, if you look back, you know, all the way, it's like, it's the same horsemen, you know, from hundreds of years ago that like pass the information down. And, you know, I sometimes feel like you and I, you know, can translate some of those ideas into the daily work of, well, the horse needs to be, you know, functioning in a round way, because that's the only way they can carry us without pain and without causing lameness, you know. And I just get like a really, I guess I'm like a mare that way, where like I have like a very, like, that's why I love mares. I just align with that. Like there's this like high fairness, like scale of like, you know, and like some of my students, you know, who don't, you know, maybe haven't really followed us enough, or, you know, I'll be like, well, he or she doesn't need to get kicked or whipped right there. Like you need to, it's not about the don't want to do it. You know, I just feel like, oof, you know, it's not that the horses many times don't want to do it. They sometimes don't understand it. They don't know how to do it in their body. Like I've just gone into this, you know, this Corona time has helped me do some work, like deep work in some in-hand stuff. And then I was looking on your website, I'm like, there she is, you know. And I was like, well, I don't know if that's what I look like when I'm doing it, but you know, I hope that's kind of what's happening. With the whole idea of, I've put all my horses before I get on, you know, I've been doing some walking, yielding, and how the hind leg connects to the jowl, and like how to raise the back. And it's the same concepts that Charles talks about with the bascules and get the horse round. And like I've taken it to a new level from groundwork before I get on. And like every horse, whether it's my 4-year-old, I trained 2 ponies for their owners, my Grand Prix horses, like the body, you know, like the horse and the body needs tutoring in order to be able to carry us. And I just thought your work in the way you're presenting it is just extremely exciting. So like, how did you go from then your back, and then, you know, I know you worked a little bit with Hillary Clayton, who's, you know, really well known in the dressage community. And, you know, but then there's like some natural horsemanship in there, and Manolo, which I have his videos, because I was like, same thing, like meeting you through the internet and through Catherine. I'm like, I think I love Manolo Mendez, you know, and like, let me devour these DVDs. And yes, like this is what we're talking about with why dressage, at the end of the day, dressage is supposed to be good for the horse. And
what's
like
you, horse, right?
You know, and so like, how did you like blend all of that together? Because I find like like you said, like your teachers sort of all came at the right time.
Right.
But then it's
Mm-hmm.
also like you being special in who you are and your message, and like how were you able to blend that all together?
I think because I was always a competitor, and it's kind of like politics today, right? Everybody's so polarized. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're this, you're the. If you're
Oh,
this,
right.
you're not this.
Yeah. If you
Right?
compete, you're not classical.
You're
And
not.
if you're classical,
You're not.
you can't compete. Yeah.
And I don't believe that to be true, because
I agree.
what is dressage? Dressage is what's good for the horse. So
Yes.
if dressage is what's good for the horse, and you understand functional anatomy, and you understand what it is that you're asking from the horse, then it shouldn't matter. We shouldn't have to tease apart or ferret apart or even have an argument about it. We certainly have, stylization. Okay, that's fair. But I think it's really about coming back to the basics and really understanding the horse in terms of who he is as a sentient being, and who he is as a species. You can't separate the mind from the body.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. And so because that was a motivation for me, it seemed to be easy to layer it in, even though still today, because I don't compete anymore, some people may feel, well, she's not competing, therefore this isn't really necessary information. That's just simply not the case. I'm not a competition hater. I've seen so many wonderful people like yourself who work and ride horses in accordance with true dressage principles. Whether you want to say it's competitive dressage or classical dressage, they're just words.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree so much.
Just be what's good for the horse.
Yes.
And so I've told Catherine and so many times in my class, I shared this quote that really I keep in my head at all times. And that is, on the road to mastery, the person who knows how will seek out the person who knows why.
Yeah, I love that.
And so functional anatomy and understanding the horse gives me the whys. Yeah. And if you know the whys, then I can make discerning choices about who I'm going to study with in terms of technique and how. Right?
Yes.
So I guess that makes me kind of a picky person at this point. Right?
Well,
but,
and if you love your horse, you should be picky.
Right. And I admire you so much because I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to learn all those techniques, or oh my gosh, I want to be able to school my horses to Grand Prix and have the techniques and the skill to do it. I feel like I have a really good understanding of the whys, and I'll spend the rest of my life learning the hows, for the very same thing that you said when somebody asked you, you're still studying with Charles for 30 years. Yeah. And that's because there's not one way of applying a technique, right? And
like every horse, every horse is like a little bit different with their conformation. And it's like, okay, so now this horse needs to do it in this way and do it with the longer neck because he's croup high and a rescue pony, and like, how do I shape that horse into and it's absolutely, I just love that, the hows and the whys. And I always say similar things, that if you understand why it's important and how to do it, you will be able to make great choices for you and your horse. There's a lot of times where I'm really like, get really intense about my place. And I feel that coming from you too, of like, it's our responsibility to be the custodian of horses, because we love the species. Yes, I love every horse I ride and train, and all my, I love horses like in general. And I feel a responsibility to, help their owners make good choices so that their lives will be, I mean, horses give us so much. It's just like incredible, and it's like the thing I could do to give back to this incredible creature is to help people become aware of what's going on, and when they understand how to do it and why it's important, which comes back to your functional anatomy of like, that does not work because it causes these things, and like, so when you can grow everyone's understanding of that, they can make good choices for their horses too. And like, as a collective community, the understanding is there, and you can, I don't want to say like protect your horse, but I mean, every time we get up there, Charles would always talk about how the horse isn't meant to carry weight, because we're sitting on his poor little, we're sitting in the weakest part, and holding on to the most sensitive, and like every moment we get up there, we should apologize for being there by creating the right functioning motion, and that, I'm like, I don't know if I just learned that from so young that it was like, it's like an emergency to like get the horse rounded up, or you're causing damage. And if you love your horse, the last thing you would ever do is be causing damage. And listening to you and learning more about you, I'm like, this is it. I mean, this is what people need to have help understanding of. Like, we didn't make this up because we want to ride classical and like fluff around and not ever, touch them with the whip. It's like, I ride with spurs and a flash nose band, and then it's like, it's become, like you're saying, like so polarized, and like, well, that's classical and that's competitive, and they're completely separate. And I'm like one of my life missions is to be like, no, you can be completely classical and do right by the horse and develop them in this systematic, gradual, gymnastic way, and bring out the best that's in them and compete and still be successful, and that whether you never want to go to a horse show ever, I mean, that's what, was kind of fun about the academy. It was like, no, this is for beginners, this is for everyone, because it's a way of thinking, and it's a way of treating your horse in a way that's respectful, in respect to their anatomy and their nature. And when I saw the work you're doing, I was like, we need to be able to host a clinic. We need to be able to host a clinic soon, because.
And I love what you say on your website. You say reading ideals is not just for elite riders, right? I think if you have this knowledge, any rider can help bring about a more healthy body, right? And I have gone through this in my life. The more I learn about functional anatomy, like with Charles, like, well, they're not intended to sat on. I've questioned, why am I even riding?
Yeah.
And I realized that there's been hundreds of years of people who were way smarter than me who learned how to do this in a way that was actually beneficial for horses. So again, that comes that responsibility. And that is, well, I'm not going to not ride, but I better learn how to ride in a way that I'm not going to harm this amazing animal that does my bidding. Right? I have no choice. Have you ever thought what they do for us? Oh, they're going to get on this trailer and go, 75 miles down the road, and they just willingly.
Words out of my own mouth. I can't believe.
Why did they do this for us?
Why would they do anything? This herd animal by itself in this tiny metal tin can, rattling down the road.
Why would they do that? It just shows you how incredibly willing they are. And if they're not doing something that you think they should be doing, the very first question that should pop in your mind is why.
Yes.
It's either
Am
because
I
he,
not doing it right? Can,
right,
is he not capable of doing it?
doing it? Is he in
Yeah.
pain? Um,
Yeah.
uh, is he just simply not understanding what it is
Yeah.
that you're asking him to do? Uh, has it caused him pain in the past and therefore he learned a behavior to protect himself? Horses don't sit around in their stalls or their pastures and rub
Yeah.
their
Think about,
muzzles.
yeah. What could I
What
do
did
to
this
make her
today?
frustrated today?
Oh, they don't
Yeah.
do that.
I'm going to get
So
her tomorrow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to me, and there's a lot of psychology, I think, that we also have to work with when we're working with our species, because for me, I mostly work with adults, so it's adult learning, and adults bring so much of their own experiences to the table,
Yeah.
and they have the experience through their own lens and their own life filters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to be respectful of that,
Yep.
and yet provide a way for them to see the horse
Mm-hmm.
as an animal that doesn't have the choice a lot of times.
Yeah.
And how can you be fair to
Right.
that individual? And I love that on your academy you have uh, a video of a bay horse that was coming back into rehab, and he had one Devon and uh,
Yes. Fiji. Yep. Fiji.
yeah, and I was so impressed with that little video clip because he came back from an injury. He was 17. Some people would throw a horse away already. He's
Yeah.
old. He's 17. He's
Right.
had an injury. He's not worth anything. Obviously, that's just a story, right?
Yeah.
But I loved the fact that you said because he had an injury in the front legs, that you weren't going to work him for long periods of time in a long, low posture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is a horse that will be moderately on the forehand.
Right.
That you're going to work him in a way that benefited him. So you're working him within his box of limitations,
Right.
and still advancing him, and still enhancing his his body and
Mm-hmm.
in his way of life. So that just it was I just that made me respect you even more when I heard you say those things. And Manolo would always say to me, Jill, I can train 100 horses to learn shoulder in,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll train it 100 different ways. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day,
Interesting.
it's still shoulder in,
Yep.
right? So
Well, and I think this idea, and I think your work really helps people understand, like, I love that, like the why, and then how to apply that and listen to our own horses. Like, I love that Manolo said that, because a lot of times people will come to a clinic and I will teach shoulder in this way, and then 4 lessons later I might teach it that way, and then they're like, dressage in one way is very strict in the way that, like, there is a certain way to help the horse function that is beneficial, but it's also very liberating because, like you said earlier, like, horses have different experiences, different muscle memories, different education levels, and it's like, for me, it's so fun to figure out how I could get that horse to understand it with the least amount of stress to his body or his brain. And that was what was interesting about Fiji when he was rehabbing. I mean, I piaffed him before I ever cantered, and if I had followed exactly, like, you walk for 6 months and then you trot 2 minutes, like a typical, like, then you can canter, a typical rehab program. I mean, it was like, get off your front feet, no matter what you're doing, and it was like, let's walk and then we'll rock you back and put you on your, because he knew that, like, he was Grand Prix or like I2 when he got injured. So it wasn't like the education was still in his brain, and I could use that to rehab him in the best way to give his legs the time to heal. And, I just thought like, well, that just makes logical sense, instead of like, okay, ooh, I should canter, but he's not fit or strong and his stifles or whatever, that now he's just going to like canter on the forehand, which
right.
that's exactly the opposite, of what I want to do. And, I just love your work in the way that when people understand things better, like we give them the knowledge and then they turn it into their own understanding, people just make better choices. And I always, get so like excited and passionate when I meet, a kinship with someone, that it's like, it's all coming to the same place of like, what's best for the horse and how can, and of course, like I say in the academy too, like everyone who is sitting on their horse, managing their horse, they are the trainer at that moment. And how do we get the correct information to more people so that the horses benefit in the long run, and I'm just such a huge fan of your work and how you're blending all of those great people like Dr. Hillary Clayton, Dr. Deb Bennett, Manolo, Mark, like all of those, and it's all different. It's not just like only vets, and it's not only natural horsemanship, and it's not only dressage, it's like the all encompassing, like picking the masters that, okay, now I need to know how the rider gets involved, so if you could tell me a little bit, I would love to hear how your passion with being a trainer, getting injured, going towards the anatomy, figuring out on a way deeper level, and then how you've been able to mix that with then the rider.
Yeah. So again, that was such a lucky thing for me. After I broke my back, it's a very interesting story. I was at the university, and it was 9/11, 2001, and I was sitting in my office, and I just watched the Twin Towers fall. And that afternoon, I was going to take a lesson from a woman. It would be my first time back on a horse after my back injury. So I left the university. I drove out to Stoughton, Wisconsin, at a dressage barn called Ufta Farm. Pat Vogel, she had Hungarian warm bloods.
Yes, I know Pat. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I was at Pat's, and when I was in graduate school, I worked at Pat's. Okay. And so she had called me and said, Jillian, I have a woman coming to teach lessons. I know that, you're ready to start riding, and I would be willing to pay for half a lesson for you to get you back up in the saddle so you can start riding Laddie again. She had a young Hungarian stud named Lad. And I said, okay. I was so broke. I had no money. I went to Pat's. I had a pair of jeans and a pair of shoes. I didn't even have nice riding boots. And the woman that I took a lesson from was Peggy Cummings.
Mm-hmm.
And Peggy Cummings was Sally Swift's head instructor for many years. Mm-hmm. And I went to go get on the horse, and Peggy said to me, you never get on a horse without warming it up from the ground for at least 10 minutes.
Interesting.
And then she watched me move a little bit, and she asked me, have you ever considered getting any body work? And I thought to myself, what's body work? Like, I had no idea that I could do something for myself.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And in that semi-private lesson, Peggy started teaching me about neutral posture, the human pelvis, the spinal mechanics of the human, and how that related to freedom and motion and movement. So even though I was starting my journey in terms of learning about equine functional anatomy, at the very same time, I started my journey on learning about the human's functional anatomy, and how those two things work together in concert to produce the most efficient movement together. As Peggy would say, synchronizing horse and human.
Cool.
And so that's how that started happening. And then I, became a working student for Peggy. And in later years, I became an instructor of hers, because I realized that so much of what I was asking for from the horses, whether it was in my in-hand work or under saddle, oftentimes was blocked by unconscious human patterns.
Yes.
And so that's how that marriage happened. And again, it's you can't just look at the horse, and you can't just look at the human. You have to look at how those two things are working together, not just physically, but also emotionally.
Yes.
So I was very lucky again to have that opportunity to work very extensively and on a deep level with Peggy. And that gave me a wonderful foundation, so that when I started to learn from Manolo and Mark and Stephanie Milham and other people, I was able to translate.
Yes.
It's very hard when you go from one instructor to another instructor and to another instructor, and they all use slightly different language. Like I never knew I'd have to become a master translator. But okay, so so saying this and so saying this, but really they're saying the same thing. They're just using
100%.
the different language, right? And it was so confusing. But if I kept going back to my anatomy, I realized exactly what they were talking about, just different words.
Yep, 100%. I mean, and I think, it's also our job. Like I always say, like I'm a translator for the horse, like what he's attempting to tell the rider by putting his head up, or, not bending in that direction, or stopping and, being upset. I sometimes joke that I'm a translator for the horse to the, it's like I'm a marriage counselor between, I'm like the third party, like the neutral third party. I'm like, well, he's doing this because you're doing that, and then you do that because he's doing that. So let's like change that dynamic. But, I've also, it's funny that we came home from Europe and we were the experts, and yes. And then, the whole idea of body work, like, well, I pay for body work on my horses. Like they get chiro and, acupuncture, like massage, like all the things. We got a TheraPlate, it's like we got everything. And then it was like, I mean, all through my 20s and probably mid 30s, I mean, I didn't do any of that, and now I'm like, it's important for me to take care of myself as well, because it all matters. It, like, everything matters. But that's also interesting, that I have said to my students too, like my hope is that, and my goal is that I create a base of understanding for you, that you can go to a clinic and in a way you won't need me. For a long time I was teaching everybody and, really wanted everybody in my camp, and this, because I believe with every fiber of my being, what Charles talks about is correct. Like that is the right way. What Manolo talks about, that is the right way. And then you can back it up with science to say, functional anatomy, that's why we have to do what we're doing, because the horse's body has not changed in thousands of years.
Yes.
And so this whole idea of helping my students, like you were saying, like translate, well, but they mean, what they said was this, but what they meant under this ideals of this umbrella of knowledge is, well, when I say whatever, that means the same thing as what they just said, so that they can also, I do think it's important. Like for both of us, you know, we've had these exceptional teachers come into our life, and you could document like this teacher led to this understanding, which then this next teacher appeared. You know, when the time is right, the teacher appears. And it's like when you're talking about your life, and you could easily think, oh, I broke my back, that's the end of everything as we know it. And that was like this amazing blessing that was the catalyst of your journey that you're on now, and how you're sharing that with so many people, when it was like, well, I mean, who knows, if that accident hadn't have happened, maybe you would still be just training horses and
That's
competing,
exactly
and not be on the platform.
what I would have done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just dying. How did you meet Charles? Like,
Oh my God. Okay. So I was, it's luck. I mean, it's just like fate or luck, or I don't know what, but I lived in a very small town, Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And my neighbor, Greta Pal, she rode, her family owned the farm, and she rode, and she was like 10 years older than me. And like I have two older sisters, and they both, you know, tried riding a little bit. And I'm like, me, I want to ride. Please let me ride. So at 7, I began riding. At 9, I started dressage. My first trainer, Gail Keln, moved to Fort Atkinson. Like, who moves to Fort Atkinson? You know, Gail.
Lucky for you.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. You know, I had my little saddlebred Solo, who's like my bestest friend in the whole world. And I started riding with Gail when I was 9. And when I was 11, 2 years later, she got Charles DeComfy to come to Wisconsin. And I interviewed her a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, how did you pick him? How did you do that? Like, there was no internet that you could be like, I'm going to Google, and I'm going to send him a Facebook message. You know, I'm like, how did you even, like, I mean, you know, people don't do that, and it's easy to do that now. I'm like, what'd you do? Like, write him a letter, you know? And she's like, yeah, I found his phone number, or whatever, called USDF, or I don't even know. And she got him to come there. And so she's like, bring your notebook, polish your boots, wear your white gloves. And I was like, so scared and intimidated. And I changed the trajectory of my life. Like, if Gail had not come to Fort Atkinson, I don't know what would have happened. And then if she had not been that amazing, like, searcher of knowledge as well, to bring him to our tiny little town, then for like the next 8-9 years, like, I rode with him 2 to 3 times a year. And then he organized to send me to Europe. I mean, it just like kept, like, when you were talking about your story, I'm like, I so get that, you know. And then when you were ready, like, the next person, you know, made themselves ready, you know. And it was like this crazy thing, like, and that's another thing, you know, when you went to go ride with Peggy, and it's like, you got your jeans and you got your boots. And like, as a teacher too, like, when I teach kids, or when I have someone come in with, you know, not the fancy, you know, outfit and the really special, amazing horse, and like come in and it's got its tongue hanging out and it's kind of lame, and you're like, okay, let's get it on the bit. And it's like, you can't judge what influence that person might have in their life, you know, because a lot of us there are times of struggle. And, you know, we didn't have great horses, or we didn't have fancy shiny boots and riding pants, but it's like, we are into this. It's our life passion, you know. And it's also a great lesson. Had she not given everything of her to you in that first lesson too, you know, Pat Vogel's like, yeah, I got this, my trainer, she's just recovering from a back injury. Who knows, you might be scared to get back on. You're coming in your jeans. 9/11 just happened. It's like,
I know.
Oh my God.
It was like a collision of reality.
Yeah.
It's like all on the same day.
But then it was like, it it that it was
It
meant,
worked.
it was meant to have, yeah. And it was like she gave you 110%, no matter, you came in your jeans. Pat supported you, you know, because she knew it's your lifeblood, you know. And it's just amazing how then that journey then reignites like a new thing of like, okay, I understand all this stuff about why the horse functions in this particular way. And now the rider who is sitting on there or on the ground is at least half, if not more than half, of this success. So how do we get to them as well? You know, it's just amazing.
And you know, the other cool thing is that people open doors for you when they can really see your passion.
Yeah. Yes.
Because so many doors open for me that, you know, probably wouldn't have opened had I not just been a ridiculously passionate kid.
Yeah.
And I always try to remember that, you know, as I teach now, that you're right. It's not always the person who comes with the best equipment or the best horse that is deserving of the information, right? Sometimes it's the quiet one that will stay in the barn until 11 o'clock at night, that doesn't always get seen, but if you pay attention, you see how passionate that young person is. And I feel also a responsibility to make this information available, not just to the elite.
Yes.
Not,
Yes.
I mean, of course, I want it available to everyone, but there was a time throughout our horsemanship history where this knowledge was only available to the elite people.
Yep. Yes.
And I wasn't an elite person, and still the doors were open for me. And so I feel just so I feel passionate about making the knowledge accessible to anyone who needs it.
Yes, 100%. And I mean, Charles, when he talks about, like, one of my favorite lectures Charles talks about is the characteristics, you know, and the virtues of a rider, you know, because to be a rider in a traditional sense is someone who is very cultured, and, you know, he goes through all these lists. And one of the virtues is generosity. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting that is one of the you know, I mean, self-discipline and courage, you know, all those things are part of it too. But I thought, what does that mean to be generous? And one of his definitions is to share information very openly, because that's being generous with your time, with your knowledge. And like, to hear you say that story, it is so true. You know, some people are like, oh, you know, I'm not third level, or I don't have a fancy horse. And I'm like, listen, if you want to know about it, I am happy to tell you about it. Yeah. And I'll tell your friends too, because, you know, let's just get everybody on here, you know, which is what's been so rewarding about the Academy, is to find a vehicle to be able to have that accessible to people, even at their house. I mean, it was, you know, with Corona coming, it was like, okay, well, a lot of my business is traveling to teach clinics, which I find very invigorating, and I'm really passionate about that. And I love to share the things I not only know now, but also what I'm currently learning. Like, that's just like this constant, like, there's just so much to learn. Like, let's just keep delving into it. And, you know, I was like, oh, like, what do we do now? Like, to be home and be with my horses, like, yay, that's living the best life, you know. But it was like this need to share was like, oof, you know, how do we do that? And, you know, then we're like, well, I guess we circle the wagons. You know, I was thinking about having it, you know, having something tangible here at our farm, and having people like you come in and do a semester or come and teach us seminars and have it really like that we have to be here. And then it was just like, well, I guess we have to move online and just make it. And it's been this amazing blessing in disguise to be able to just have that vehicle of like, here, click on the button and
the academy
you can,
is amazing. The way that you have it organized and what you have to offer, like your you do, you know, you have your lesson library,
yeah,
which I loved going through that because they weren't like 2 hours long, right? But
yeah,
they were like an appropriate amount of time, so like I can have a cup of coffee or two in the morning and go through 2 or 3 lessons and say, wow, that is a amazing tip right there. And I'm gonna go play with that today now when I go out and work my horses. So I just love how easy it is to navigate the academy.
That
it's
is all
so
Catherine.
Catherine
Catherine is like amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. She really brought my dream to life. Yeah. It was like, God. I mean,
just wonderful.
Charles has inspired, you know, the knowledge and all I've had a lot of great teachers that, again, like integrating everybody into what's current and how it applies to, you know, modern day dressage, you know, because at the end of the day, the horse has not changed much, you know, in thousands of years. And our knowledge of like what you can bring to the world this is why those principles are in place, because you know, it's just amazing, like hearing a lot of things that you were saying and Dr. Hillary Clayton and Dr. Deb too. And then I work a lot with Susanna von Dietz, and she's you know, on the human anatomy side, you know, so I'm sure really similar to Peggy. And it's like Charles talked about that, and they knew that because that had worked. And so they then wrote it down, and then they passed it down, and then it becomes this you know, principle of how to do it. And then it's really fun to see modern day science, which you can prove from the horse's skeleton and, you know, all these different, you know, what this ligament does to the horse's body. And it's like, oh, that's why we are not to roll cur, because science, you know, says like, oh, you know, that's not proven that is going to work, you know, and let's do it this way, you know. And that's just been so fun to see the modern science be able to, with all of this access into the horse's body, prove that those old, you know, classical principles, you know, still apply. And that's
true. Yeah. And I think the other thing I got from your introduction of yourself on your page is that you're an athlete. You were you were a captain of your basketball team, basketball team, you know, and how that coaching, like just visiting with you now, I can see how you are an amazing coach, because you have that leadership skill and you can rally people, and you see that riders and horses, we're athletes, right?
Yes.
And we can be coached to become better athletes. We don't coach athletes to become unathletic, you know, or to be a Debbie Downer, like, oh yeah, that really sucked, you know. Like we know we've been coached also by good coaches in our athletic career. So I think that's another thing that you really bring to the table that is special, because you understand that dynamic as well. And I also think what's interesting about this type of work, when you mentioned the science, is when I was at the University of Wisconsin, I was really lucky because my graduate program is what's referred to as an interdisciplinary program. So it was mandatory for me to take research courses, but I could custom design my graduate studies as a whole. So that's what allowed me to work with other professors and researchers outside of the University of Wisconsin. So that's why I could tap into and work with Dr. Clayton, have her look at my research project and then to give me feedback on what my thesis was. Dr. Nancy Nicholson, who unfortunately just passed away, another brilliant biomechanic genius and dressage judge. And then speaking of letters, I got to work with another doctor named Dr. Sarah Weish, and she wrote like these amazing books, like The Horse's Back in Motion, The Horse's Muscles in Motion. And she only communicated via letter. Wow. So I actually had to write letters to her, and it was like, wow, like a modern day pen pal. It was very interesting. So I think what makes the horsemanship journey, and coming around to where I originally started, is that it's still a blend of hard science and soft science, subjective or qualitative and quantitative research coming together, right? Because you can have the hard science by looking at anatomy and how it moves. But what makes it subjective is that there are different angles, there's different lengths, there's different minds. So there are so many different variables that have to be aligned with certain techniques that match that individual's need.
Yeah, yes.
Right. So all of that tacit knowledge from our masters before us is still brought forward. It's respected because it's tried and true, right? Through trial and error. And now that can be validated through more, quantitative research or hard science, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways we're stepping ahead. We're building because we have that type of science behind what it is that we do. And then at the same time, sometimes I feel like we're going back.
Yes.
And we're losing some of our basic horsemanship knowledge because people simply don't live with horses anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
Or they don't have as much practical experience of an overall horsemanship experience, lifestyle. Like, we're still here mucking stalls every day, bathing horses, treating colics at 2:00 in the morning, bandaging horses, we're doing the whole shebang, right? Which lends so much to what it means to be an equestrian. Not just sitting on a horse a couple days a week, which, I mean, there's benefits of that as well. But I'd really like to bring back, and I think what your academy is doing is it's offering just those types of things. Like being a part of this journey is about being a part of the whole darn thing.
Yeah.
And that makes you a very deep, multi-layered horse person.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly what we are attempting to produce, which then, also just goes into your regular life, that it's like, it's amazing, all these lessons we talk about with the horses and what we're learning, but who we need to become in order to, give that back to our horses. I mean, it's to become such a deeper personal journey through ourselves as well. And that's another layer that we're, there's so much information to share with everyone, and there's all, I just love the idea of incorporating the understanding of how the horse's body works and how we work and how we're an athlete, and add that in as well to like the exercises and the theory sessions we have in the academy. And then also eventually being able to add in this deeper personal level of what is it about ourselves that are either blocking us from teaching the horse in that way? Or where am I emotionally stagnant, which is also affecting my body? You know, like, there's just like so many layers that's like, you know, sometimes, you know, it was really cute. My dad asked me about the academy, and he's like, you know, are you gonna run out of any content? And I'm like, Dad, like, no, like, there is like, it's never, it's just like, it just keeps, because then again, like you were saying too, which is fun to hear from an expert like you, that, you know, every horse is a little bit different, you know, and you know, where that horse needs to be exercised and where this horse needs to be exercised due to a lot of different variables. I find that fascinating to be able to share with people, because, you know, it is, I want people to be able to trust the system and the program, like I have, like that I have felt it work with all these different horses and at all different levels of their life, and how to apply that in the right way where they can, like I just always say, like, it just works. Like Charles and his, you know, what he passes to me just works. And then I, you know, watch a segment about Manolo, and it's like, yes, like that is the same ideals, you know, presented in a different way. And yeah, it's just amazing to see how it's all, you know, all good riding is for the horse, and it benefits the horse, and then of course, you know, benefits us on the other end of that too. I mean, if the horse is lame, we can't enjoy it. He's, you know, we certainly would never want to cause pain or a shortened, you know, life of soundness, you know. I mean, that's all the point, you know. And it's like, why is that important? Is because, you know, the biggest thing about dressage is about training the horse to do what we ask it without pain and causing damage. And, you know, when you come from that place, it's then also easy to, oh, and then I also want to compete, you know, or I don't ever care to go in the show ring. But it isn't just like, I want to go only to the championships no matter what, you know. And it's like, well, that's a personal problem, you know, and a character problem. So let's talk about that and your ego, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's really, you know, that's something that really struck me too, about what you were saying on the academy, is that it's about the life lessons that we learn from horses, that is invaluable, yeah. And how it requires us to look at ourselves on a very deep level. Many years ago, I read a book written by a woman. Her name's Lady Diana Muckpo, and she was she's a dressage rider, and she was married to Trunkpa, who was a Tibetan teacher. And because of Lady Diana's stature, she was allowed to go ride at the Spanish riding school when it was still state-owned. And Trunkpa went there to watch her schooling the horses. And when she finished riding, she came up, and he was weeping. And she says, "My goodness, what's wrong?" And he said, "When I watch these people, they're the living embodiment of what it is that I'm trying to teach." In the moment, in that meditative place where nothing else exists except for what you're doing, that mindfulness. Yeah. And then Lady Trunkpa said, "How can that be? I know many of these writers and their personal lives are a complete mess." And he said, "Well, that is the goal. And every single one of us have had that moment with the horse where nothing else exists."
Yeah.
And Trunkpa says the goal is to take that and translate that into how you live your life. And that is growth.
Yes.
So those experiences that I have with my horses when everything is so right, that one step, that one stride, you know, sometimes we'll ride a whole year because we have that one perfect step, and you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. Okay, I'm going to try to, you know, have that moment of bliss again. But then that feeling of living your life in that feeling. And so, you know, it really is for you and I, it's not just a hobby. It's a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's our lifestyle. It's who we are. And it's such a wonderful thing when you have the awareness that horses are here to teach us something.
Yes.
You know,
about ourselves.
Jill, we have only just begun to learn what it is that the horses have to teach us.
Yeah.
So
I always say that moment that you were talking about, that bliss, that moment of bliss is, you know, I call it that moment when the clouds part and the sunbeam comes down and the angels hit the high C, and it's like, oh, and then the clouds come back and it goes away. And you're like, oh my God, you know, what, how can I get that back? And then, you know, you're able to kind of find the way to recreate that under saddle. And then I love that idea too of how do you then take that into, you know, your life. As a Charles always says that, you know, riding well is a metaphor for a well-lived life. And you know, I love that. And it's like, you know, hashtag goals of, you know, how to bring that, you know, every day to, you know, who you are and how you are, you know, and what horses have. It's just really neat, you know, to hear both of our stories of like which that, you know, we were given and, you know, are now doing so good.
We're very lucky girls.
Yeah, and it just feels so great to finally meet you. I mean, I know not totally in person.
We will,
but
I know I can't wait. And you know, the thing is, I always giggle when someone refers to me as an expert, because I don't really see myself as that, because the more you know, the more you realize, oh my God.
Yeah.
I have so much to learn, you know. Yeah. So but I look so forward to learning more from you, JJ, and I'm
oh, likewise. I just it's just going to be just great. And I just feel like such a kinship with you. And, you know, I want to thank Catherine for putting us together, because, you know, she was like, you're going to love Jillian. And then I would like Google a little bit and I'm like, oh yeah, like I love what you're doing and how you're doing it. And just, you know, it has just so much merit. And, you know, the way in which you teach it, you know, it's going to just be, I can't wait to expose, you know, my team Tate, not only with, you know, hopefully next, I think September we're talking, you know, to have you actually in person, which would be incredible. But, you know, to even have you somehow part of the academy and affiliated with us, so that everyone can, you know, learn why we're doing what we're doing, you know, and why it's important to become a full, you know, horse person is, you know, part of the deal.
It's part of the deal. So, well, my dear, I think this is a wonderful introduction.
Yeah, it was great.
Fantastic. I know you've got lots of things on your docket today.
Oh, I'm sure you do too. So thank you so much for taking the time. And it was just an honor. I'm so excited for the future.
Well, likewise, sweetie. And I know that our paths are going to cross many times from here on out.
That's exciting.
All right.
Thank you, Catherine.
Catherine, thank you.
Here I am.
You're awesome.
That was fun. That was really fun.
That was so fun. Oh my God.
More to come.
More to come.
Lots more to come.
Wait for it.
Right.
Well, thank you guys so much.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jillian.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you, JJ. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye.